first Muslim country.
I'll just keep looking for them.
And in the year 500, there was a big meeting of the bishops.
Yeah.
And they had one question. And the whole of this meeting was, does Christ have two natures, the human nature and the divine nature? Or is it one nature with two aspects?
Yeah, this is the problem.
Yeah. And the Ethiopians decide, I can't remember which way they went, I think that it was one nature of two aspects. And I thought this was a good enough reason to split.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand the split between East and West, because having a pope, having celibate priests, these are big reasons. But that the Ethiopia split off before, 500 years before, and it's like, wow, that's amazing.
It's an oddity.
And so you're the Church of the Antioch, right?
I went to go to the Greek.
Oh, yeah.
We used to go there.
I don't know.
Until we
We
had
just
our
big news that my daughter has won
in Lower Patna.
a scholarship.
And I had
studied
still go to the
university,
because they
National
live
University was very
in
good.
Greece before they come
And she's going to Canberra.
and until now they have
starting
communication
She
with the
started
church
studying
there.
systems.
And
So
I
it's
went
a summer
to
project.
the airport.
All these kids study, so they pay for it.
3
months, 4 months.
So, Kent Hills Church.
She's at this stage, she's adamant that she will fly for Christmas, but I think as soon as she goes,
Well, yes and no, but see, the people who are, Canberra is not a great place to party. People would go home or something, so the number of people live there is very small. So in that case, maybe she will say, wait for the last week when the prices are, the fares are very high, and they say, I'm coming, whether it's $1,000 or not, I don't know.
And then I came back, because in Greece the priests don't cut their beards.
Hey, my daughter is also was in Auckland, so when she wants to come, she'll come.
And they find that
That I'm coming, can you do something?
my current husband at the moment,
Excuse me.
It's only Thursday.
I mean, at the moment,
Everything is relative, isn't it?
he's in London at the moment.
Okay.
He's doing this, I can't buy the first marriage.
Right.
And of course,
Having said that, my godson,
since he was there, there have been three, one was this train bombing, but there was an accident there somewhere.
Yeah.
And there was something else, so.
but that's it.
The
baby, they're yes,
they're
very
fine.
nice. All over the place, and you have to say very properly.
My ears until they were sitting there.
When they fly back, and I was thinking to myself,
because I didn't know.
yes, and now there's all these
What can
So insulated.
You just can't plan it.
or maybe you people can go to Canberra for the Christmas, you know. I mean, it is not, it's not home. It's not home. But it is sit down with the family and fight if anything else.
I think
That's what happened.
You can have a workshop. And you say nothing else. Okay, thank you for being here on this list, because that's not very many people, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Small number.
Don't talk to me about it. I don't know.
we have the same
People don't realize how much it
something like that. And also
has been put into, running an event like that. And
like the hymns.
But like you said, having said that, the guest speaker is not here yet, so.
well, they will be. I can see them.
Probably. I know that they are something.
No, they
They should.
If you come to the first, come to all of them. That's why, if I wouldn't come, I wouldn't come to any, so.
Exactly. I mean,
What's the main language?
Hey, Katie.
They're like English.
I don't understand it.
People come in slowly.
Yes.
Oh,
You do
Okay. How are you? Very good. And you?
6 past. I feel very, very annoyed when people.
it's a hard word.
Because you say
Although I come with, in my country, you know, everyone is straight. Yeah, but still, I've always been very kind of like, yeah, punctual when it comes to time.
no, I'm just interested.
How's things?
Good.
Very good.
I mean,
Very
the
busy.
or whatever.
Looking forward to finish my study in 2
It's November.
I'll finish my bachelor. Then going to full-time masters. Going to London tomorrow.
Well, I'm interested in.
Mandarin.
Is it by any means?
You know the sweet Mandarin? No. Yes. So usually we go visit them. So there's an invitation there, we go see them, and then before they arrive here.
Thank you.
Hi, guys.
Hi, good to see you.
There's some interpreting.
I'm glad you're here. I was
All
worried.
different countries. So we have Syrian, we have Iraqi,
Okay, so
and within the countries different ethnicities. Iraqi Kurdish, Syrian Kurdish, Syrian Arab, and then we have Iranian Kurdish.
Ashwini, can you use it? Sorry? Straight from here, party time?
Yeah, but second.
I have one online, which
Is it the then you know what you do?
I'll leave that in your hands.
Do you need me or Leo to change your
This speaker is an omnidirectional speaker. You don't have to stay right in front of it, but try not to go too far away.
Right, can I have the whiteboard?
Yes.
Or can I write on that?
You can write on that one.
Yes.
Or whichever one you want.
I will check, careful with cables. I will check which, Can I get you a cup of tea or something?
Water would be lovely.
Water?
Thank you.
Water is easy, you're cheap to run.
I'm a cheap.
I'm done looking for the data. Nothing to do. That's right. What happened to the internet? Right.
I couldn't care less.
Yeah.
Okay, so, we have looked at Mocha.
I do, yes.
It's just that I don't have, I will not be able to print copies for, do you need them to?
No, it's just looking to have a look at and pass it out. They don't need to take them.
Okay, I'll just show you. So, these people must have Mocha already, because we know that it's a translation. And everyone can have this if you want to explain something. Like, say, let's have a look at, let's say, like a shopping list or whatever, right? It's based on the language, isn't it? So if let's say in some language like in mine, we don't have the word cooking oil, it's the same word for butter or fat. So if you're checking memory as a practitioner, to me as an interpreter, it doesn't matter if the patient repeats as tea, butter, eggs, salt, and then back. But in some instances, for example, with Mooker, where it's George is always the one about something, and then the question is, did he replace one something to remember?
Yeah, the words the other way.
Yeah, in that respect, it's very important to you as a practitioner that it's not just a memory, but also with the logical method, and that the language has integrated and so that's how we look at it really, because these languages you'll see these sort of advantages. These languages pretty different grammatical structures, and sometimes we discussed it before. We talk about mental health or mental disability or something else, environmental, like well-being or whatever. In their language, they can't job or stuff like that. So you don't need to worry about mental disability. I don't know, looking towards how you put it down to English. Intellectual disability form a mental disorder. And so when I say somehow do you not like
What are you doing in
how are they
business class for the last
say it
6
in our
months?
So anyway, what I'm asking now is that I have a number of meetings before
I put it as a joke kind of thing.
and we want to have enough of this, or do you? Enough.
That's just a massive
So my next question is, would you like me to give them handouts now or when we come back? May I ask everyone to make sure that you have signed in? And here are the two handouts that accompany Leslie's presentation. The third one is Mooker test that I gave you last time. If you haven't got a Mooker or didn't get a Mooker test, let me know please, so that we know it's for today. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
If you weren't there last time, remember Mooker, not Jill.
Yep.
So this is for tonight. And also please make sure that everyone has filled in evaluation. If you haven't attended one of those presentations, in other words, at the moment, everyone must have 3. You can't see? It's because of the daylight savings. We are probably.
That's all right. It's nice and warm.
Enjoy it. It's rare enough we're seeing it at the moment.
Okay, so I believe we are ready to go. Unless if you want to.
You want to do the intro?
I've got.
You weren't there last night, were you? You were? Last week. Okay, just don't say yes, What I need to hear are the specific comments, like for example, we would have liked to spend more time on this, or this topic wasn't of particular interest, or if we could have more, whatever. So don't just tell me that I'm the best, because I know it anyway.
Will not repeat that.
And you can say Leslie was brilliant.
Yes, no, that's another one. That's a specific one.
Goes without saying.
Okay, good evening everyone and welcome. Tonight's session concludes our mini-series on interpreting in mental health settings. And we discussed it earlier that it's such a broad and complex topic that we are only able to provide you with the briefest guide to potential challenges when interpreting for patients with mental health issues. Our spectacular avalanche of stellar presenters continues tonight. And so with us is Leslie Maskery from Psychogeriatric Ward of Kiripuru Hospital, which is also known as Te Whare Raiuta. And Leslie will talk to us about challenges of communicating with patients who suffer with dementia, right?
Yes.
Okay, over to Leslie.
Thank you, and thank you to Inna for that introduction, and thank you for the invite to talk to you. It's great to have the opportunity to do this. As you can see, there was going to be two of us, but my colleague Claire has had to leave for a family matter, so you've just got me, I'm afraid. Now, I'm hoping this will be more of a conversation than me talking to you. I want to talk about communication in the context of dementia, and because I work in that field every day, sometimes we forget and we put jargon in and use non-mainstream words, so feel free to interrupt me and ask if I say something that's a bit specific. And so what I'd like to talk about first is communication itself. So how can it be affected by cognitive impairment? And as you can see, communication is evolving all the time and changing. And so this is how kids now mostly communicate. So I just want to take a few minutes to think about how is communication affected for the person living with dementia. And that's what the PLWD stands for. And so from your own experience, what would you think would be the ways that cognitive impairment would impact on someone's communication?
They will not fall.
Well, I have a real case because I interned for dementia patient. The impression I have, she just repeat and repeat. Always repeat the same sentence again and again.
Yep, absolutely. Conversation can be repetitive. What else might we see?
Forgetful.
Yeah, and that ties into why it's repetitive, because if I'm feeling anxious about when my doctor's appointment is, I say, when am I going to the doctor's? And you say, Tuesday. And if I'm forgetful, I'm still feeling anxious because I've forgotten that answer. So when am I going to the doctor's?
I used to work with, I had a client actually as a social worker. She was suffering from dementia. She used to think her son-in-law is her husband. Right. And she was saying like, you know, this is my husband and my kids are in schools and they will come back soon, so yeah.
Yeah, so misidentifying people. You know, I worked with a lady who misidentified her husband and she would assault him because there was this strange man in her house. Because this old man wasn't her husband was this good-looking man in the wedding photos, not this old git.
I was interested for a lady and she used to remember what happened in the past and she forgot the present.
Yes. So, yep, often we see short-term memory affected more than long-term.
Sometimes it can grow because the system may have difficult to recollecting what they heard. So the speech is quite interrupted and the flow of the conversation is compromised.
Yep, we might see that poor flow or disjointed conversation. Yep.
Inhibition seems to be reduced.
Yeah, people might say and do things that they wouldn't have done previously, and I have just the best example of that. My now ex-mother-in-law, she'd moved into a rest home because her cognitive impairment meant she wasn't managing at home. And my partner and I went to see her, and she looked both of us up and down and then said to him, if you lost a bit of weight, you could find yourself a nice wife. But she's just the best insult, 2 for 1 really. But yeah, she would never have said that previously. So yeah, it was just that disinhibition.
Lack of concentration.
Yeah, and this is something that might impact when we're doing cognitive screening with someone. They can't maintain their focus on what we want them to.
And I'm not sure if this is common with the people suffering from dementia, but my clients, she was always singing very old hymns, church hymns and songs.
Right.
Yeah, and she can remember every single word, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Song words are stored in a different filing cabinet in your brain, and often when people can't converse, you put the music on and they can sing.
Yes,
So
and she learned these hymns when she was a child, so that was like 50, 60 years ago, so that was amazing.
I wonder whether people suffering from dementia, they tend to have delusions or have hallucinations.
sometimes there's those false beliefs, but more often it's tied in with the memory, that it'll be things like, I've got to get home to my mother, or I've got to go pick the kids up from school. And rather than it being a true psychotic delusional belief, it's because the person's long-term memories are taking them back to that time when the children were young. So yeah, that ties in with the memory being worse. So my lists aren't exhaustive, but here's some of the points that I thought of. Expressive and receptive dysphasia, and dysphasia just means difficulty with speaking. So expressive is when the person knows what they want to say, but they're not able to express that. And receptive is when the person can hear what you're saying fine, but the words don't make any sense anymore. A nominal aphasia is forgetting the name for things, not being able to name things, and that's why when we do the cognitive test, we will say, what's this? What's this? And people might be able to say, there's a sheet of pictures which we'll look at shortly, that I had a gentleman say to me, oh, brown, hoppy thing, this big pouch, lives in Australia. Everything except the word kangaroo. People will often return to their mother tongue because the things we forget first are the things we learnt last. So if someone's only recently learnt English, they might lose their English quite quickly. And so I was working with a Russian family who, when I first met this gentleman, he was going to English lessons and still learning English. And then he stopped being able to learn new English, and then he started to lose what he'd learned, and then he'd reverted to communicating in Russian, and then he started to lose his Russian words too. So we could see the progression of his cognitive impairment. The loss of the ability to read. Misinterpreting, which tied in with what we said there about misidentifying things. I don't know if you're able to see that, but that word, I do not think it means what you think it means. A person's decision-making ability gets impacted when they're communication, because one of the things to have capacity to make our own decisions is that we need to be able to communicate that decision. perseveration, which is that the stickiness of thoughts. So the example I gave about worrying about the doctor's appointment, it's not being able to move that thought on. It gets stuck, and so when am I at the doctor's? When am I at the doctor's? And I can't move on. And as you highlighted, the ability to sing may be retained. Paralinguistic features may still be understood, so someone might not be able to understand your words, but they can understand that the tone is kind, they can understand that you're smiling, they can understand your expression. And so those things become more important when people can't understand the words. People need increased time to process information, and so communication, you need to allow appropriate time for that. The loss of the ability to process multiple concepts, so not able to multitask anymore. You need to focus on one thing at a time. So, bearing in mind how cognitive impairment can impact on your communication, what can we do to improve it, do you think?
If they cannot understand us, we can use body language just to show them our kindness.
Yeah, absolutely. Use non-verbal communication.
Using pictures as well?
Yeah.
Will it help if you sang to the patient? And
only if it's a song they know. It's that recognition with. But sometimes that can be the way to make a link with someone who's not able to talk anymore.
Of course, having an interpreter who speaks them all the time.
I'm so glad you said that. And we do try to. Rather than using family members, because people have their own agenda and they have their own take on situations, and so it's better to have an objective person translating for you.
What else? Just physically being there and physical touch as well, would that help?
Depends on the culture.
Why I've put therapeutic in there is because some people really don't like being touched, and so it's when it's appropriate. Yeah, some people really respond to physical touch and other people don't, and there's a cultural element to that and a personal preference, and we never know someone's history. So
will change the mode of communication help? For example, reading and writing instead of speaking.
Yeah, some people may be able to read, but not so good verbally, and so yeah.
I remember there was a case I worked on, also a dementia patient. She just turned a poker face, big motionless. Whatever you talk to her, she just looked at you like that. And by the end of the day, we just talked with his to her family instead. So I'm not sure whether this is another curve to help communicate. Talk with the family member instead of the patient who's non person.
Yeah, often in our field we need to use collateral information because often the person can't give us a clear account of their situation or what their issues are.
One of the people online suggests using hand motions.
Yeah, gestures, definitely. And often you need to use different strategies in conjunction, and so if I need Inna to come with me, and if Inna, come with me, no response, I might And I might need to come back with a cup of tea.
Any other choices?
What other strategies might we use?
Probably remembering about that multitasking is a challenge, so no more than one thing at a time.
Absolutely.
And speak slowly and calmly.
What about listening? Because some of them will continue talking, you know, and telling stories, so is listening to them will help?
Absolutely. And
That's not really communication, isn't it? Because it's one way only.
But if you're looking at them, like maintaining eye contact and nodding, that means you're listening, so, yeah.
Yeah, and that can be an important part of establishing that rapport in the first place. And you might need to wait and listen before you can ask a question. Yeah.
But can we come back to this, because I think that can be tricky for interpreters when we know that we have such certain time to be at the assignment, and allowing, let's say, if I do briefing before I even started my job, and then I allow a person talk, and they can't interrupt. So just how to get out of the situation.
Yeah, you do need to have some boundaries round that, particularly when your time's precious, and so you've got to strike that balance between allowing people time, listening, but doing the job that you're there to do. So yeah, it's a bit of a juggle.
Yeah. I have a question, might be for Ian actually. In this case, because is there a point of briefing the client, because he or she will forget even if I brief them. After 5 minutes they will forget, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you
So,
like to
just to say from our perspective, yeah, because again it's part of the establishing of rapport. Even if somebody forgets what you tell them, they know that you've spoke to them in a kind way, and so yeah, it's valuable even if they're not able to retain that.
But we also mentioned previously that working in mental health setting, we would like to be briefed by you as well, so by practitioner in regards of the purpose of the visit. What is it, just a social visit? Are we just checking on them, or would you like to do something else? Is there any significance in the way they speak? So we need to know what you are trying to do, because it helps us to kind of provide some feedback.
Yeah. And do feel free to ask the clinician what their expectations are, because we're not trained in working with you either. So yeah, feel free before the session starts to clarify those things. And what can you expect to see? What are we assessing with the person, so that your expectations of the session.
On that point, we go to the office, you talk to the reception, and we waiting to doctor come, and then both of us go into the room. So where do we get the time to have that briefing from the expert?
Sometimes I think you just need to say, could I just have 2 minutes?
Before you start?
Yeah, just to talk about my role, and
okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, just regarding communication, my friend's mom has dementia, and she will forget a lot of things about appointments, etc. And yet, like, she's getting on now, she's 85 plus, and if they ever want to talk to her about, Mum, what would you like, say when you pass away, she will not talk about that sort. So why is there a block about certain things? How do we understand that sort of communication, that she seems to understand, she doesn't want to talk about things like that?
Yeah, and for some people that's their way of dealing with that. They don't want to talk about death and dying.
But they seem to remember that. That's the point I'm making with dementia, that they specifically do not want to talk about death. And yet they can forget about, we think maybe.
Because for her, the reason she doesn't want to talk about death is something entrenched from long ago. So it's not something she's learning each time. Okay. It's that long-term memory still being there.
I see, okay, thank you.
Yeah. So, just to move on. Again, my lists aren't exhaustive, they're some of the things that occurred to me. So some of the tips, and I've got a couple of handouts that I'll leave with you at the end, just to summarise these. So adapting to the individual, and it's, like you said, you finding what mode works for that person. Do gestures work? Does the person respond to touch? And that can be really difficult to find out if you're doing a one-off visit to somebody. Be calm and gentle, and that ties in with what Ina said about going slowly and keeping calm.
Excuse me, sometimes the dementia patient, they can be very aggressive. They want to hit you with whatever they have.
Yeah, occasionally, yes.
Well, once they were just, don't come in my house. They just throw the cushion at you.
And then you don't go in the house. Safety has got to be your first consideration.
So you don't explain, don't argue, just follow
Yeah.
the instructions.
Don't argue, because you will never win that argument. And so you just need to leave it sometimes. Forewarn people what's going to happen. And so, like when I just went and just said to Ina, come here, and she didn't know what was happening. So tell people what's going on. For people at an advanced level of dementia, they might need you to be at eye level. And so, rather than me standing over you, to get down to the right level. And this is why it's important that we communicate effectively. To have a positive approach, to use those non-verbals, have a smile, have a warm, positive tone in your voice. Redirection rather than commands, and so me saying to Ina, come over here, might not get anywhere, but me saying, would you like to come with me for a cup of tea, and just redirect her interest into another area, might have a more positive response. To use short sentences, not a whole lengthy thing where your meaning gets lost. As someone said, to separate those concepts out and to take steps. To minimise distractions, and so ask if you can turn the telly off when you go in the room, things like that. This might not be funny after today. Reinforcing words with actions and gestures. Appropriate use of touch, we've talked about. Assess for atypical signs of pain, and I know you're not there in a clinical role, but you might pick up subtle things that we don't in a situation, and so do feel free to say, actually, looked a bit uncomfortable. Because if people aren't able to articulate, ouch, my shoulder hurts, we might see frowns where what they're talking about doesn't require a frown, so the frown might be related to pain. Simple things like using their preferred name. Now, I just wanted to move on to look at some of the cognitive screening tools that we most commonly use in our practice in this area. So I know Ina has circulated some there, and I've got a few that are just to have a glance at and pass round. Now, that it's all one. These are just to look at. And so the Addenbrooke's, which is my favourite, I think you've got a ruder.
It's ruder than mocha.
Right. Now the mocha comes in 3 forms, so you will get them with different animals on, so don't think it's the wrong one.
We've seen this last week.
Yeah.
The same as well.
Yes.
So the Addenbrooke's, as you can see, comes in different languages, and so if a clinician's asking you to do an Addenbrooke, do check with them if they get one in the language that you're translating to.
Would you mind writing down the name of the one that you mentioned?
Yeah, certainly. That one.
We can look it up. No, they're not the ruder. Okay, that's the name of it. ADD.
So it gets called the ACE. And so it comes in Estonian, Hindi, Chinese, all sorts of languages.
What if the client or the patient doesn't speak any language or we don't write any language?
They don't need to. Well, for one point they do. One question, they're asked to write 2 sentences, and if someone's not literate, then we just take that question out and make it out of a smaller total at the end.
Even with the withdrawal, like last week I mentioned the same thing. Some people, they never had used a pen in their life.
Right.
So even holding a pen will be a mission for them.
Yeah, yeah. And so in those situations, the best one to choose, even though it's not perfect, would be the RUDAS, which takes less account of educational status and cultural issues. So that would be the best tool to choose in that instance, although it would still be a challenge.
I can't for the life of me remember what this is called.
Lots of different things, an accordion or a piano accordion, or should I get you to do the rest of the test? So the RUDAS stands for the Roland and the Mocha I shared with you last week. So they're the 3 main cognitive screening tools that you might be asked to help complete. Now just to look at some of the examples, on the Mocha you've got the trail making test, and this is one that people often find a challenge when they've got cognitive impairments. And so we need to ask people to do 1A, 2B, 3C, 4D. And so the trail is started off for them, and we need to ask them to continue making the trail to its completion.
May I ask a question? As the people, they get more and more forgotten what they learn new, and ABC, they actually do Chinese, their second language. Then they lost the ability to recognize what is A, what is B.
Yeah, and that's where the Mocha wouldn't perhaps be a good fit for someone who doesn't have that level of language skills.
May I ask you, please, so what about languages which don't use the Latin alphabet? So ABC, so is this the approach you use regardless? What are you after? Is it the logic of the alphabet following the number?
It's being able to alternate them.
So if, can I have any alphabet in your language? Can you just sing it?
Go is our alphabet.
So if what was the first one?
Ka.
Ka, if is number 1, and then
Ka.
Does it answer your question? Has this patient passed your test?
Did it go number, letter, number, letter, number, letter? That's what you're looking for.
Okay. But what about the sequence as well, though?
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
they may have a number and a letter, but it may not necessarily be in sequence.
No, it needs to be in sequence. That's what you're looking
2
for.
things, so alternate and sequence.
Yeah.
So my point is that when you're working through an interpreter, and when you are being an interpreter, and this is the test presented to the patient, that it's your task to advise in the most polite, what's that one, firm but brief way, that in your language, the ABC don't work this way, it may be Kaga, whatnot, and then it will be you who are the expert to advise the practitioner that yes, the patient is following this pattern.
Yes.
Then we need to put our letters in different paper.
For this test, yeah, this is a pen and paper one, so it wouldn't be asking the person to say it. It would be, yeah. And for someone who didn't recognise these letters and numbers, we may need to recreate it with the appropriate symbols.
That's right.
Yeah. But the important part of this test is that alternation, being able, because in English the A, B, C, D, E is entrenched from infant school, and so that's a long-term memory. But being able to alternate it with letters isn't. That's not something that people learn when they're little, and so they've got to use the logic to work that out and the memory to figure out, is it a number, is it a letter next? So that's what we're looking for with the trail making.
Yeah, but again, have seen that, for example, in the Indians, people at the age where they're in that geriatric kind of situation, they might not have any schooling at all. So, you know, the point you said then is all entrenched.
Yeah, and that's where it's really important for you to relay that information to the clinician and say, it's not that they can't do this, it's they've never been able to do this. Yeah. So the letter tap test is reading a whole list of letters out, and the person has to tap on the letter A every time you say the letter A. And so that, again, translating into other alphabets.
Is it always letter A?
Yes.
So does it matter that, what are you trying to check here? The recognition of the sound, or?
It's the concentration.
So
if,
let's
listening
say,
out for you say, it doesn't matter if it's letter A, it's as long as I tap on the same sound when I hear
there
it.
you go. So then it doesn't
So
matter.
it doesn't matter which language.
So are there tests for people who do not have the skills? So we can say until we're blue in the face that these people are pre-literate and they have no written language, they haven't learnt any written language, but is there a test to accommodate that?
No, and that would be the important point to let the clinician know. A paper screening tool isn't appropriate in this situation.
Screening tools? How can a diagnosis be made when somebody?
It would be on the person's clinical presentation. So that collateral information we talked about, that the person's daughter might know, mum's always forgetting now. She's been forgetting for about 6 months. And so it would be based on that clinical presentation rather than being able to measure it. These screening tools are just that. They're just a screening tool, and they form part of the whole assessment. They're great if we can do them, but often we can't. And so a really important part of your role is pointing that out when this isn't going to be appropriate for this person.
It's not just language, it's also blind people. So how would they?
There is a blind mocker. It's out of less points, because obviously we can't ask people to draw.
I've been with a client recently, she didn't read and write in any language, and they're doing exactly the same test. The only thing they asked her to do is to draw a clock and put the numbers, but she wasn't even able to write the numbers, she was copying them from the clock.
Right.
So she was like writing, for example, 12, but she cannot read it as 12. She was looking at the clock and writing it, copying the image.
Right.
Yeah.
Interpreting for the RUDAS. Now, I don't know if you've seen the instructions that come with the RUDAS. It's freely available online, and there are specific instructions for working with an interpreter. And so we need to, as clinicians, to make sure that you guys know what the expectations are about the session. And stressing the importance of concurrent and precise interpreting, because sometimes the instructions are really important to the test.
Excuse me, I do have a question once I was interpreting, and I think one of the questions is ask the patient to name some names of we equals. And we equals in Chinese, we can make a very academic word, which is precise. But the families behind me keep saying that, no, she can't answer you because that's not the way we're talking. You should say car instead of we equal.
Right.
So I was very embarrassing at that time because when I really interpret it for the patient, she just looked at me like I'm crazy.
Right.
And the family at my back just saying, no, she's wrong. It's car.
Okay. And that is where we should defer to your cultural knowledge of which word is. Sometimes the very precise word isn't the best one to use.
Yeah, because the precise word sometimes we need some education. But my case, that patient was not educated at all.
Right.
So they,
Yeah. And so we would be relying on you to take note of instances where the test taker's performance may have been affected by subtle or unintended changes to the meaning of the test due to language or cultural factors. And that's a perfect example of that point, that although you were following the instructions exactly, it wasn't a great fit and it impacted on that person's performance.
Do we aim to help him or help her? Should I just follow the family's suggestion saying that, can you name some cars, things like that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then just explain to the clinician, for this person that word was more appropriate. Yeah. And to inform the interpreter that it may be necessary at the end of the test for you to clarify a concept covered in the assessment to further make the distinction between the actual cognitive capacity and the cultural bias, which obviously impacts on the person's performance. And so there's an online link that there's a video showing you someone interpreting for a RUDIS, so you can see how it would be done. The Addenbrooke's, so just some examples from that one. When we're testing the domain of fluency, we would ask the person to tell us all the words they can think of, beginning with a particular letter, but not proper nouns, so not names of places or people. And so the example we give is, if I give you C, you can't give me Catherine or Canada. And then you say, right, I'm going to give you the letter P and I'll stop you after a minute. And so we want all the P words that people can think of.
That's it?
I'm not moving.
Again, this one has in English is your second language.
Is that it?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Right, so any particular questions about specific experiences you've had?
Just a question.
Yeah.
One at a time.
Sorry about the situation. I'm going to give you a letter of the alphabet. In one of the examples, I saw that the letter was A.
Right.
And in English, it's a very common situation when words start. There are many words starting with A. In Russian, it's not so open, so there will be a limited number of words.
Right.
Starting with similar letters. So shall we raise this with the practitioner and maybe agree on another letter, or it will be that kind of the same frequency letter?
Yeah, and that's one of the things why it's useful to be familiar with the most commonly used screening tools before you go in. And so issues like that, you can grab the clinician at the beginning and just say, F isn't a great choice in Russian, or, you know, is it okay if I use the letter C or whatever? Yeah.
Do we have any other burning questions? Because Leslie has brought a handout on, the tips. So by now you will all be equipped with the Ruda smoker and the GP code, the 6-item test. And you can all look up the Edinburgh one, especially if it applies to your language. And maybe now will be just a good opportunity to remind interpreters of Chinese, Vietnamese, Italian and Spanish, if you do wish to have a copy of a translated terminology, like a glossary, you need to email me with your request so that I can flick it back to you. Okay? Is that all?
Yeah, and so, if anybody hasn't got copies of those that wants them, I've left a master copy within it, so
right.
Feel free.
Just one question.
Thank you for your time.
Sorry, just one last question. You said the Rudas was available in Hindi as well. Is it accessible
the
online?
Addenbrooks, not the Rudas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it available online?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're free to download.
Yeah.
So.
Okay then. So with that we are saying thank you so very much for coming and talking to us about this critical field. And we are putting our hands together. Don't have right, okay, and here is something, a little token of our appreciation. I'm sure you will put it here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Leslie only bought 10 of those tips handouts. So the multi-page one, there won't be enough for everyone. These are just as a sample for you to have a look at. Okay?
Yep, but as I say, they are free online if anyone does want to download them.
Thank you. Okay, so just 1 minute break, people watching online. We need to sort out our next presenter. And you people can have a breather. Okay, thank you so much. About the link.
Hi. This is what extra video on.
Actually, I embedded the video on here for you.
Yeah.
This is us. This is our company that provided decided to distribute this. This is if anyone needs professional counseling after a stressful job. This is what our company pays for. So this is the brochure and the card. All you need to do is you need to, I guess, call a coordinator and tell them that I think that you are needing some kind. No, call us first because we are paying for it. Actually I don't know. So why don't we ask her? Why don't we ask Vera? It's all confidential here, so it will be about a stressful job. So we know you've done a job, so that's kind of not exactly confidential. It's not about your family issues or your next door neighbor. It's about something that happened at work. But what you are discussing with the council will be confidential. You could, however, not at the moment because this is not our usual venue, so I don't have access to. So what we could do with the handouts, or we'll scan and send it to everyone because people watching online didn't have a copy either. So we will be sending copies of some handouts, of which there weren't enough because Leslie just brought them in like this. No, that's fine. Do we need
No, that sounds good.
Этих нет достаточно шаток, что принесла. Вы много очень сходили, это желательно электронно, поэтому она так сидела дома, думаю, надо есть. Я привыкла, люди едут никуда, и так далее, то есть в среду пришли. Ой, я тоже бываю. Понятно. Окей. So we will scan and send it. Did you receive the terminology, the glossary one?
Usually
yes, you did. I sent it to you. Well, my email today, but I didn't know. I popped into the office and Jennifer told me that you emailed her. Because I don't have your email. Yes, and she flicked it back to me. And I attached and sent it to you and Jennifer. What is your email address? Shall I write down for you? I think so. Okay, I did thank you. Yeah, oh, you check. It might go into spam. It might go to spam. Okay, then. Are we all back? Are we all good to go?
Not yet. Just having trouble with sound.
Yeah, never mind. Sound, okay.
I will cue you to press the link, and I'll play it at the same time. It might be tiny bit out of sync, but at least I'll get the audio at the same time. How's that? Let me know when you're ready with it.
Are we all back? So are we ready to go? You just indicate.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so now you tell me. Yes, but you have to email me. This way I get your email, and then. Yeah. Can you just tell me your email address then? Because I emailed Jennifer instead, but I don't have your email. I'm not Jennifer, that's why. I know.
Not for interpreting, I use it all for translation because I did translation. Not interpreting.
And it's Jennifer.
Yeah. Are we ready?
Yes.
Okay, welcome back. As I mentioned earlier, our spectacular avalanche of stellar presenters continues with Janet Robinson from Well Elder. Janet is a clinical leader and a counselor, and this is the company that provides counseling to older people with all sorts of various challenges. Let's put it this way. Over to you, please. Welcome.
Well, we're very different. We as counsellors, don't use the medical model that Leslie's been talking about previously. So my name's Janet, and I'm a counsellor in a set for Well Elder. And I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about the way we work to start with. Well Elder provides counselling for people who are over 60. It's a community organisation, so it's important to us that counselling is accessible and it's affordable. Any mental health issues are in the mild to moderate range. We do work with people who have dementia if they have insight into their condition, and we also work with carers, some of whom might be under 60. And we do recognise that older people are used to getting on with life themselves often, but they may face additional challenges as they age. So what is counselling? According to NZAC, which is the regulatory board for counsellors, counselling involves the formation of professional relationships based on ethical values and principles. So the purpose is to assist clients to increase their understanding of themselves and others, to develop more resourceful ways of living, and to bring about change in their lives. And the core values are respect for human dignity, partnership, autonomy, responsible caring, personal integrity, and social justice. And the social justice area is particularly important, I think, when we're working with people from different ethnicities who might tend to be marginalised in New Zealand society. So we're often working with clients who've never been to counselling before, whose doctors perhaps have suggested they come along. So the way we tend to explain it to them is that counselling is an opportunity to talk to someone outside their immediate circle about the things that might be worrying them. We stress that counselling is confidential. The only caveat on that is if there's significant risk to their life or somebody else's life. And we do ask clients to self-assess their well-being and relationships with others. So rather than us assessing them, we ask them how they think they're doing. And we use this outcome rating scale and ask them to put a cross on each of these continua, designating where they think they've been over the last week. First one is their personal well-being, and if they mark down this end, it's the low end, and this end is the high end. And there's another continuum for family and close relationships. The third one is work and friendships. And the last one is their overall sense of well-being, taking all of those dimensions into consideration. Now, if that seems daunting to people, we won't continue with it because we're only going to use it if it's useful. So we'll usually try it on the first session. If people like it, because they can then see if they're making progress, we might use it every session, or we might use it on the last session to see where people have progressed over their 6 sessions, because we only provide short-term counselling, so we want to make sure that people are feeling that they're making progress. Unclear, but what makes for efficacy in counselling, it's quite interesting that extra therapeutic factors, the client's own strengths and supports in the community, for instance, make up 40% of the change in clients when they come to counselling. So it's not actually what we're doing, you know, there's no sort of magic bullet in the session, but we're kind of galvanising the strengths that they already have. So that's why you'll find us asking them, well, what are you doing during the day? If you weren't so worried, what would you like to be doing? Who are you in touch with? So we'll spend quite a lot of time typically looking at the factors that help the person to live successfully, even though they're often challenged when they come to us. The other thing that is quite interesting is that expectancy affects the client's knowledge of being treated, and their confidence in the treatment accounts for about 15% of change in clients. And the other parts that you as interpreters and we as counsellors have much more influence over in some ways are the relationship factors. So about 30% of what makes for efficacy in counselling is about the relationship, the caring, the empathy and the warmth between counsellor and interpreter and the client. The specific techniques that we use, you probably hear techniques like cognitive behavioural therapy or narrative techniques. It seems that it doesn't really matter which technique is used as long as the counsellor is competent in using it and as long as the relationship is strong. There's a lot of evidence around cognitive behavioural because it's easier to test in some ways. But that the specific technique doesn't actually account for as much of the change as the relationship. This is an example of what we don't want happening in counselling. This lady says, "Honey, I've been through 2 world wars, the Great Depression, taught 13,000 children, administered 4 elementary schools and outlived every one of the pastors I've worked with. I'm 89 years old, and you're telling me it's bedtime?" So we're wanting to respect the knowledge and learning and wisdom that people have and work from that. So a secure understanding between counsellor and interpreter is vital to a healthy counselling relationship. And counsellors do recognise that many clients from different ethnicities do not respond well to a completely non-directive method, and so provide where appropriate a more structured approach with psychoeducational input and information sharing. So that might be something like what happens in the brain when somebody is anxious and how to calm the anxious brain, that kind of thing. it's a bit more concrete often than perhaps we'd use with Pākehā New Zealanders. And we also recognise that emotional distress is often tied up with practical problems. Sometimes counselling and social work are sort of in different silos, but in our work we recognise that to a large extent people's distress is caused through their circumstances, their pain, or being in a rest home that they don't want, or you know, economic difficulties. So we will work with those too, which is a little bit different to some counsellors. So getting to the crux of it, how can interpreters and counsellors work together to enhance the therapeutic alliance? So this has been a bit of a journey for me since I talked to Inu about this presentation. I've learned heaps, and I feel like I'd like to rerun the sessions that we ran together with a client. Counsellors hold the ultimate responsibility for the session and are responsible for a psychologically safe environment. So they need to take that responsibility. Counsellors and interpreters need to have a shared understanding of the structure and clarity. And this is the bit that I've been particularly struck by. Ideally, counsellors and interpreters should have time to brief and to debrief. And this is a real issue for us at Well Elder because we are funded by the DHB, minimally funded, and generally we just employ you guys for 1 hour and we want to get going with the client as much as we can, so we tend to dive in there straight away, and at the end of the session, you know, bye-bye, we hope we haven't gone 5 minutes over so we don't have to pay for another hour. And you know, that's just the fact of community agencies, isn't it? So that's one of the areas that I'm thinking, you know, perhaps we need to do some work on that. So some of the challenges are that interpreters are rightly concerned with accuracy and may feel uncomfortable with the messy nature of counselling, where the counsellor adopts a non-expert position. So the counsellor will be saying, well, you know, what makes you feel better in the day when perhaps it seems obvious to you. Interpreters are exposed to emotionally charged and painful situations without the preparation and support a counsellor gets. So I go to supervision once a fortnight and I'm able to kind of download with my supervisor things that are really worrying or that I feel I've mucked up or whatever. But I don't think that you get that opportunity. You do? Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah. Well, that's news to me, my new learning. Counsellors may have ways of working which are not conventional in everyday conversation. For example, long silences or allowing a distressed person to cry. And there may be a fear on behalf of the counsellors at not being able to form a rapport with a client, feeling excluded from the interpreter-client dyad because they share a language, or also containing the anxiety in the room. So there's not only the client's anxiety, but there's the interpreter's anxiety sometimes, and the anxiety that comes with a first meeting for everybody. So I don't know if anybody's looked up the Mother Tongue website. It's a group in the UK who specialise in counselling and interpreters working together. So I've downloaded this little video, some of which will seem no doubt very familiar to you. So it's just 7 minutes, so we'll have a look at it and then I can tell for a bit of a discussion around it.
Okay, it may be a bit of out of sync with audio because we're doing it from 2 sources, but on 3 if you want to click it. 1, 2, 3. Try it again.
Okay.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
laughter recognition here.
No.
train interpreters in UK?
So any comments about that? I heard over here you know all this, but it's often the clinicians who don't know it.
We studied this in the introduction, so it's very basic.
But it's working together, isn't it? That's the challenge.
Yeah. You're going to want to close that tab.
Oh, yes, so from your laughter, I gather that some of those kind of things happen where you're kind of forced into a situation where you have to take control of the session sometimes. Did you find some of those situations rather familiar?
Yes, actually, there was a comment made by one of the review. They say that according to our culture, counseling doesn't work because orientation culture require encourage people to cover their emotions and hold their mistakes forever to themselves. So counseling sometimes is like digging out what you're inside so you can flesh out and you become better. Actually, there was a real case is once I was interpreting for a divorced couple, and in front of the counselor, they talk very well. It doesn't like their marriage is going fall into pieces. But once they step out, they use the language, blah, 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 start arguing. And I was there. I think does the counseling really helping? But the counseling section, I'm working really helping them because they act in front of the counselor. According to the culture, they just hide their everything.
But as interpreter, it's not my business if the counseling is working or not. I'm there just to interpret the language, and as soon as I finish, I delete it.
So that was a message. Well, at that moment, there was a thinking hit me. I'm wondering whether I should go back and tell the counselor, okay, they're not working well.
Unless they are shooting, killing each other, you can't. But I think that most the dictators of the thing was because each of the mistakes we have been drilled that you don't do that. What is happening there?
So you know what the expectation is, but the counsellor doesn't necessarily.
No, there's some of the mistakes the interpreter was making. For example, he or she was talking more than was said in that time. You know, or start giving support or don't cry, you know, be here.
That's why it's very important to know our boundaries as well as to brief both parties before we start the session. So, and if they start doing anything wrong, we can actually say, sorry, we cannot do this. We as interpreter, we should do this, and then say the same thing to the other person in their own language.
That's why Sajan said that, you know, do they train interpreters over there? Because there was a list of things.
Well, the handout and it's just given to you is an example of the support writing group that Mother Tongue has hosted for interpreters in the UK. They found that that writing was a really good way of processing what they'd been exposed to in mental health counselling situations. And they wrote a whole lot of stuff, and you can access this book online. And this is just one that an interpreter has written, imagining that they're the client. So it's something that, you know, was never shown to the client or anything, but it's kind of processing what went on in the session and what the interpreter imagined the client would feel like. And it's very much like you're just saying about, you know, I've played the role in the session, but actually, I'm not sure what happened. So you're often left with that kind of, you know, not sure feeling. Well, I think I might have to go back to the slide. How do I skip over that to the next one?
I thought you just did it.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You're very easy in when there are 3 people involved for people to take on those roles of persecutor, victim and rescuer. You saw that in some of those examples, and for them to rotate round the circle too. So an awareness of relationship dynamics and self-awareness of personal reactions are important, obviously. So although performing a vital role, support is, according to what I've been reading, often limited, but you're saying that you feel you have good support. In emotionally charged settings where clients may be experiencing mental health challenges, interpreters have to hold the professional boundaries that you mentioned while experiencing great personal pressure, which can come from both sides of the dialogue. And it's inevitable that we become invested with feelings, either conscious or unconscious. They can't be ignored, and both supervision and writing offer safe exploration of those feelings. So I do recommend the Mother Tongue website and in other words, the Interpreter's Story, if you haven't seen that. And we won't go through this letter now, but you might want to have a look at it. If you do have any questions about our service or about counselling in general, we're open Tuesday to Thursday here in Newtown, and you're most welcome to be in touch with us if you'd like to be.
Any questions to Janet? Is this free or plan to
we ask for a contribution towards funds, and we suggest $10 or more, but if a person can't afford $10, we still provide the service.
Okay. If there are no more questions, then big round of applause. And this is our contribution. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. And perhaps now Vera would like to explain about this brochure that you passed out
actually
here.
a good point.
While I'm taking Janet's
desk in front of you.
You'll
find the free counselling services
can be young,
that I
the
provide. You're all
sticker.
welcome to use it at any point, 24/7. It's completely anonymous. We never find out who is using the services. We never find out why they're using the service. We just pay for it.
So how is
and
it
we're
done?
happy to. So you just call
First,
the number.
Call that number.
You can call the number, or you can go online and make a booking. Or any time, day or night, there's the 0500 number. So I haven't got one in front of me. So you'll find it's called can I grab one of the cards? Yeah.
0508.
Yeah, Vitae. So you can go online, or you can make the phone number. It would be good maybe to have a card in and there's more cards over there by the coffee. And you can go online, you make a booking, or just call the number. Anytime, day or night, 24/7. And it's completely anonymous.
So do we just tell them that we are looking
That you're working for Temple New Zealand. No names, no nothing.
Oh, you don't need to tell them the name.
You don't tell them your name, you do not tell them which language you speak, you do not tell them which job you do, you nothing, absolutely nothing. It's completely and utterly anonymous.
You just book, say if you book online, just go to them and that's it.
I haven't actually seen the booking form myself, but it should be pretty straightforward, but it is completely
I believe you must mention that you are from Interpreting New Zealand to them, so that the bill goes to interpreting, but all the details of your conversation are completely confidential, but you can, as I said, this is about the job you've done, not about your personal issues at home or something like that, but if a job that you've done impacted on you so badly that you can't sleep or you're bringing it home and, unleashing on your family members.
Last time, actually, Robin was saying that it can be any issue, not only in the job related, because they say even in personal life, that can
okay, then I stand corrected.
You're working, so, but I don't know, maybe the policy will change, but that's what she said before.
I don't know, then perhaps the best port of call will be Robin then, and so maybe when we all get together again at the AGM, we can ask this question, because I was led to believe that it's...
In the brochure, it says personal and workplace stress, relationship difficulties, managing conflict, anxiety and depression, anger or violence, grief and or loss, harassment or bullying, personal trauma, addictions, budgeting, motivation, self-esteem, communication issues.
No, we understand that. What I mean is that Interpret New Zealand will pay for your counselling. I thought, yes, about some issues related to the job you're doing. However, let's leave it, because I can't answer this question. Let's leave it. Okay, so we can have a tea break. I can see that Rebecca is here. So maybe 10 minutes break. So there's tea, coffee, and biscuits. People at home, we are planning to be back at 7 forward, say. So see you there. Okay, thank you. Okay, so here are the biscuits. We can take it to the kitchen.
Put the camera on the card.
I'll have to do it after the fact.
Okay.
Is anyone having tea and coffee at home?
Me? I will.
Okay, then you can take it to the kitchen. The whole lot, so that you don't make any mess.
I don't. Is there an attendance for today?
Yes. There was a sheet somewhere. That's the last one.
Hi, Rebecca. Familiar. Hi, Dan. Sorry?
What's your language?
My language? English.
Are you the next presenter?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I thought you were an interpreter, sorry.
No, I'm not an interpreter. I can interpret English for you.
And yet I've done that.
You have done that?
Gibberish into English and back again.
Rebecca?
Yeah, hey
I'm Leo.
there. G'day, Leo.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
Okay,
It's
so
very exotic having a IT.
It's not that exotic.
It is because I do presentations here and I don't have a.
Okay.
It's pretty zappy.
So we're
isn't it?
streaming online.
Mhm.
This camera will be focused on you. I'm going to turn off the crowds whenever they're talking. So this is the mic that they hear you from. It's omnidirectional. You don't have to stay right on it. However, if you could project and probably stay as close to it as possible. You don't want to be way over here kind of thing. Where would you like to stand when you give your presentation? And you only have to focus on this crowd. That's all you have to worry about.
Here so that you click on next.
Oh, yes. Yes,
Yeah.
I understand.
Okay, cool. So that's perfect.
Yes, I'll need to drive that slide.
Yeah, so basically, just use the arrows and you should be fine. Okay. Yeah, just project when you speak and that's it.
Okay.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Did you work today, Rebecca?
No, I worked in different capacity. You'll hear all about my other work.
Yeah.
I went to my
Because yesterday you were here till 9.
Yeah, exactly. But I only work part-time, but today I was working with my supervisor. I had to present a case, audio.
Yeah.
You've probably done it before, haven't you? To record a counselling session, and then with my supervisor go through the counselling session.
Okay, yes.
Robin was saying no names ever come to us in the office, just an invoice. Never know who speaks to them, so you guys should be okay.
So even, I think they ask for names, but the agency would not give their names to Interpret in New Zealand.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So I'm going to give people a handout and get them to do an exercise.
Okay.
Is it going to be okay with you?
Yep. Did you? No, you didn't send us anything on that. So they'll have to.
I can give you one.
No, I wouldn't. I'd have to scan it. So
Yeah.
should be
Shame I
fine.
didn't think of that.
Fine.
Actually, Ina did mention that you were streaming live, but I didn't think that far.
That's fine.
Yes, sorry about that.
Yeah. Could I get it after the fact though?
Hey?
Could I get one and I'll scan it after the fact and I'll give it to the people who were online?
Exactly.
Thank you. That'd be great.
Because I printed it up for 30, but it doesn't look like there's 30 people.
No. That should be fine.
4, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Yeah, we're in the low teens, I think.
And there's like international bands and groups, dancing groups, they were there. It was amazing.
Opinion. Right, welcome back everyone. And it's my great pleasure and privilege to welcome our third presenter who concludes our mini-series, lovely Rebecca Goldhurst from Red Cross, who will talk to us about looking after ourselves. Finally, it will be all about ourselves and finding well-being and working safely in this critical field. Over to Rebecca.
Thank you, Ina. Well, Ina and I met each other in this very room. That
Too much information.
that we were presenting together to Red Cross, and so we've been training the volunteers to then support the refugees arriving here in Wellington. So that's my part-time job, but as Ina and I worked together for many months, what we discovered was that I had another part-time job, and that part-time job is a counsellor, and so I'm a Gestalt psychotherapist. And so we kind of concocted, as Ina eyed off her new workshop for me to come in and talk to you about your well-being and your self-care. And being a naturopath and a counsellor myself, I'm really passionate about providing people with what we call in the trade psych ed, psychological education, which kind of runs alongside counselling. So as we're counselling and we see something that seems really useful to someone, like, do you turn your light off when you're sleeping at night? No, I don't. I leave my computer on. Maybe that would help, you know, with your sleep, your difficulty sleeping. And so what I'm really going to talk to you about today is what I'd call psychological education. So it's information that can be really useful for you to take care of yourself. And lots of this you'll probably know, lots of it's common sense. So I hope you find some useful bits and pieces in there, because of course I'm going to have to kind of do a broad brush in such a small amount of time. But there was a particular area that Ina and I were keen on talking about, and that area, so these are the key messages that I'd really like you to take home, really, that your health is your priority and really impacts your work. And then also, you know, the boundaries that we're going to talk about and your health and well-being will protect you to be able to do your work in your high-stress environment. So here's what Ina and I were really keen to talk about is vicarious trauma, and make sure that you are all on board and understand what that means. I like the kind of the pseudo definition of compassion fatigue, because it gives you a really good indication as to what it is, and vicarious trauma, which I understand now is really inevitably happening, that when you're, as you do as interpreters, step into the world of the other person and interpret for them, relay their information and their experience and their feelings, then you're really taking on board what that is. And so what I am going to engage with you here is what it is that you can do about that experience, because really that's part of life. So with vicarious trauma, here are some red flags for you to have a look at, not in very dark, not very bright for you to see, but it's so that you have some cues and understandings of, if you're presenting with these red flags, that you can make sure that you address and do something about them, or if you don't, then you're going to be really impacted by the stress and the trauma that you're stepping into. So part of it is that you start expressing or feeling like you are the trauma or the person. That's one red flag to keep an eye out for. That your emotional symptoms, which I'll continually talk about this evening, that they're presenting in a way that's really unusual for you, or that you're expressing yourself in ways that you wouldn't typically, or in very strong ways where you're depressed or angry or anxious. That's kind of stepping out of what's going on for you. Also, physical symptoms are really common as well. So that can just be basic things like headaches and tummy aches and fatigue, and then it can go into really extreme sensations that you can take on board where you're taking on the physical aspect of that person, or that you're experiencing pain that's unpredictable or unknown. So it really is unlimited what the physical and emotional impacts can be. And then the fourth one is about you really becoming very drained or being impacted energetically, so that your experience as an interpreter, afterwards you feel like you need to go to bed, or that you're so drained that you're incapacitated to do anything else, to just really gentle things where you just feel tired, or that you're not wanting to do things, not wanting to go out when you were going to go out that evening. And then of course here we have more extreme things like hopelessness and disillusioned with the world or your life as well. And then the last one is really withdrawing. So the impact of the trauma or the experience that you're having while you're interpreting then impacts you in a way where you actually start isolating yourself, or you're really stepping out of life and withdrawing and not being able to interact with people or participate. So yes, and I'm sorry.
For example, if you work in clinic and you go with a client with some symptoms they describe, which you find yourself is similar to them, and after the consulting, you're thinking, oh, am I also in his conditions or her conditions? Is that considered as trauma as well?
Yes.
That's considered trauma as well.
Yeah. So the word vicarious really means that you're being impacted by something that's next to you. So you're not having the traumatic experience, but you're just vicariously or alongside that experience and being impacted.
Owning the trauma? It's not mine, but I'm kind of
taking it on.
Yes.
Yeah.
But also a lack of empathy is a sign of compassion fatigue, isn't it? So you point out a lack of empathy,
it can
be actually problematic. So it's like a defense system, and I think, to me personally, that's the most concerning symptom.
Yes, and then and that's a very grey area, isn't it? Because compassion is something that's normal and healthy for a person to be experiencing, but then we have a professional presentation where we need to manage our compassion, where we're not kind of stepping into the other person and drowning ourselves, so that we're not able to keep our professional boundary.
How soon after an assignment can one expect, these side effects?
That's a good question. It really can just be straight away, or can actually be even weeks and months later. So it can really, there's no limit to that time, and usually there's some kind of indication that's very unusual for your characteristic, and very commonly there's some preoccupation or dreams or thinking about or feeling what it is that you've gone through when you've been interpreting.
I just want to say, like, as interpreter, I have two roles, so they're very, actually, both of them, like as a social worker, I have empathy, but actually, as an interpreter, I have a lack of empathy. I'm there as a machine, so I'm not sure, and I don't feel like I'm affected of that, but I've been doing that for a long time, but I go there, I'm a language machine.
Yeah.
When I leave the appointment, I won't think about what happened there anymore. So it's kind of because that's how it should be. So I don't think there's some negative symptoms if I have lack of empathy as an interpreter, because we don't need to be thinking, because empathy is the first sign of stepping emotionally into the situation.
It is, isn't it?
Empathy is a normal, right?
Yes, normal, of course. But yes, it's of course. But there, like most of the time, I'll say I'll be kind of, I wouldn't smile or I wouldn't feel sad about the situation. I'll be there just like interpreting the language, because I'm very concentrating on my mission as language, that I don't have any other feelings.
Thank you. I suggest that we let Rebecca carry on with your slides and finish, and then we can have a discussion more. Unless there are any questions relating to this slide.
I'm really happy with people to talk and contribute, because this is a very personal area, And also I'd like to do an exercise which will involve all your participation as well. So I'm much more comfortable and can enjoy talking with you or talking with me.
Sorry, just a question about this slide.
And I'll manage the time, don't you worry, Ina.
As a professional, as a practitioner, do you think that if we experience this and we go to our next assignment, that will impact the quality?
Absolutely.
So what would be your preference if we go to the assignment and we tell you about it, or we don't take the assignment?
I would imagine that there'd be lots of things that you'd have to take into consideration. And so Sargon's model, where he has very strict boundaries and he's, like he says, he's a language machine, would be a very effective way from going from one assignment to another. But that might not be your style. It's not my style. My style is to be emotionally probably distant. That's probably more my approach. And so I think that you need to find, and what we're going to talk about as we go on is kind of different strategies and tools and insights so that you can know how to hear what's going on for you and then best support yourself. So in reality, it's probably different from day to day and how vulnerable you are and what's going on for you at that time and with your client as well. So I would imagine that through your work that you have places and counsellors that you can go and speak to, or supervisors, to be able to debrief if you need to as you're travelling along as well. So the other part of vicarious trauma is another piece which we hadn't quite talked about, Ina, but I thought was really relevant, is what's called transference in the counselling world, which just really means that, here I've given you an example. It means that you've stirred some emotions up in yourself and you've taken on what's going on, and then you project it or you express it in a way so that here I have, I am angry with my mother, and so I might take that anger out on my husband, which I probably have actually. But that just for an example where that we can very blindly do that, and we're not aware of what's happening, but we can take on feelings of others or of ourselves, and then we go along, and then we might project them onto our clients, or we might be interpreting and wondering why we're so irritable or edgy or uncomfortable. That we and what I want to talk about is how to check in with yourself and to see what's going on, so that you're making sure that, like Sargon, you can be a language machine where you can be absolutely meticulous about your delivery and your availability as an interpreter. So, who knows what's the next slides here on, but I wanted to talk to you about stress. So, of course, if you have vicarious trauma or transference, or you're stimulated in any way by stress, I really love this definition where it's really your body or your person engaging in energy because it's in an uncomfortable situation. So your body might interpret something that your physical environment, or it might be something you're thinking, or something that someone else is saying, which all can then facilitate the stress response. So what happens when you have stress, which I do now, I have a lot of cortisol and adrenaline racing around my body. And that's absolutely normal and healthy in a short-term environment where I've just come to chat with you, and I have some presentation nerves, which are settling down. But if I was then to go home and I still was very heightened, and then I wasn't able to sleep, and I was like that all night, then that long-term impact is going to really make a difference to my health and my well-being. And some of the symptoms of stress can present and look just the same as, and really they're interchangeable: stress, depression, and anxiety. So just to keep you aware of that. And here, what happens is when you release stress, when you're stressed, you release cortisol, and when you have a lot of cortisol for a long period of time, then your body has to endure and it's like it's in fight and flight or freeze for a long period of time, and so then it really starts impacting quite seriously on your well-being and your sense of self. And the reason why I want to start talking about the symptoms and the presentations is for you to start having, but consider these part of your thinking and feeling of yourself. So you go, well, I feel really moody. What's going on? And has something happened? And is there something that I need to do about that to take care of myself, to put myself back into balance, so that I'm able to have well-being and then thrive?
If this will continue, the stress, if that might take us to post-traumatic stress disorder?
Yes, yeah, it could, absolutely. And in a way, this is what's happening bodily, and so then, as you could imagine, after a while, the cortisol and the adrenaline run out. The body isn't able to, continually reduce it, because the body's really just designed just to do it for a little bit of time, just to protect ourselves in an emergency or a perceived emergency. But after a while, the cortisol and adrenaline run out, and so then we become depressed or very flat, and then those presenting symptoms like burnout and hopelessness then start appearing. So really, they're a sign of long-term stress.
So does this work the other way around? For example, if you're undergoing some depression or you have a very low mood period, does that mean your body is lack of this hormone? So you just need to take more of it?
It's part of the cycle. It is that if you were very low energy and you're depressed, you would have to be depleted in cortisol and adrenaline, because they're the hormones when we get up in the morning that are immediately released and activated so that we can get up and go. If we don't have those hormones and many, many other hormones, then we're not able to get out of bed. Yeah. Okay. So, boundaries. And this is a very shifty area, but I just wanted to put this on the table because, in a way, it's your responsibility for you to start, but to continually, as we all do, and we all have boundaries, to recognise where you're choosing your boundaries and when they're automatic. So that you might be a very emotional person like me, but then when I work with clients, I need to have really good, strong, clear boundaries so that I'm not stepping out of my well-being, and also really not serving or being appropriate for the person that it is that I'm working with. I want to do this exercise with you and hand it out. This exercise is how it is that we can have a look at what it is that we're doing with ourselves, and just to continue that conversation. And really what it is just a couple of circles, and sometimes they overlap. And what it is that in this one, as a pie chart, to decide what it is that is your energy going in, so what gives you energy, and then what depletes your energy. So just have a play, just be as spontaneous as you can. Is there no more?
Can you please back up?
Pardon? They didn't reach, sorry, I thought I had given lots around. So just not thinking about it too much, but just to put in here in a pie chart. So cycling gives me lots of energy, so I'd put that into like 20%. Food gives me energy, sleep does. Fighting with my husband depletes my energy. And then there might be things that both deplete your energy, like work gives me energy, but then it also drains my energy. So just as spontaneously as you can, just to have a look did you want
Did you want the pie chart?
Pie chart, yes, pie chart.
Does anyone understand what a pie chart is?
Mm.
Sort of kind of like sections, like, I don't know, but here, coffee, 50% of the energy.
Yes.
Sorry, I thought so something like this, where I'm going 50% gardening gives me energy, cycling,
Exercise.
sleeping, yep, whatever. It's just for you. We're not going to discuss it, or it's just for you to start having a think about it, because we're going to talk about all these different areas now.
So when you think about that, without your energy goal, it's kind of energy deprivation. It's not useful use of energy.
Yeah, so what drains your energy, what takes away from your energy? I have another picture which I just can show you as well.
I reckon if I work hard crushing wood and I'm really satisfied, it's not where my energy went, right? It's my emotional energy.
It could be any energy, couldn't it? And that's kind of what I want to have a bit of a play with. So it's where you feel depleted or energy drains out of you, as opposed to energy coming into your resources or your sense of self. So I'm talking emotionally, physically, mentally and spiritually. So all of yourselves. Your
So sometimes you may feel that you get energy from exercising, but you also put energy into exercising.
Yeah.
Some of those will be overlapping.
Yes, that's right. Maybe I could have a little thing in the middle where the two circles meet so that they could be overlapping there. But the idea of this exercise is, and my style of counselling, which is Gestalt psychotherapy, is very much about exploring and creating more awareness and more understanding of yourself, so that you can best look after yourself and be as much of yourself as you can. So it's just what we call an experiment for you to hopefully explore and get some more understanding of yourself. And segueing into this piece here, where how is it that we can listen to ourselves, and so this is just part of an exercise to engage in that, for you to find new ways and to stop and be available to yourself, so that you can listen and recognise that you're all sorts of different parts of yourself, so that you can hear what's going on, because if you're not listening, you're not going to know when you go out of balance, and so you won't do anything about it. And sometimes you might decide, like, I'll stay out drinking and I'll just decide I'm not going to listen to myself that I'm tired. Well, I'm going to listen to myself that I'm tired, but I'm going to make the executive decision that I'm going to stay out because I'm having fun and I want to, and I'll reap the consequences, which is I'll be tired in the morning, most likely. So not to hold necessarily any criticism or judgment on yourself. And so we're going to talk about that as well, is that if you're able to generate and foster an environment with yourself, a relationship with yourself where you're kind and gentle, so that you are much more able to listen. Because if you're berating yourself or making things hard for yourself, then you're much less likely to listen. This piece I find really interesting. It's very debatable, but the point of this slide is really just to show you, geneticists did this research about happiness, is that we really have 40% choice about how it is that we behave and what our habits are, and so we have the capacity to have that much change or our collaboration to make things as well and as healthy as we like for ourselves. So in this piece it's saying 50% is genetics, so we can't do anything about that. 10% is circumstance, so I'm living in Wellington, so it rains a lot, and 40% I have the choice, so I can choose how it is that I can be really happy giving this talk, or I can be really annoyed or anxious, or that I have the capacity to choose lots of different options. And easier said than done, because of course it doesn't necessarily mean just because we say it that we do it, but we can start fostering and engaging in processes that that's possible.
So there is an inherent imbalance in that.
There is, isn't there?
Does that mean that we cannot be happy?
Does that mean we're born as a happy person or unhappy person? My daughter is
This,
very unhappy.
this happiness set point, which is really interesting, is that the happiness set point is that we have created a set point, and that we can actually change it. So my disposition when I was a child is that I was a glass half full kind of person, and so my disposition was to be optimistic as opposed to pessimistic or negative as a response. And so my happiness set point was relatively high, and I can actually make it higher or lower as I want. So we can create that. So this particular study has pointed out that we have the capacity to shift that. So it's the natural buoyancy place that we come back to after an event.
I just want to say, the genetic part of it, if it's like 50% genetic, most of us from the Middle Eastern, like from the Middle East, we wouldn't be happy because of the, like most of our grandfathers went through very difficult times.
There will be circumstances
as well.
No, but that's genetic.
That's 50%.
No, the genetic is inside your genes.
Yeah.
No, but it's not those war or something, but those war is the circumstances.
Yeah, but the circumstances can be genetic by the time. If it goes for very
generation
long
to
time,
generation.
Think about what type of people live through that and go on and have children, the strength it takes to do that.
How quickly you recover.
May I just comment very quickly that I wonder if you were going to, that it has been analyzed by Geert Hofstede, I'm sure you've heard the name, about cultural dimensions, and those, abundance versus something else is one of those that he actually, that's what Sargon is saying, that some cultures are more prone to be happy and happy-go-lucky and kind of, just happy just for no reason. And yes, that perhaps, no, I'm not talking about drugs or anything.
It's not drugs, it's just those leaves,
If you are interested, I really advise you to look into Geert Hofstede, because it's not a very reader-friendly material, but it provides lots of statistics that perhaps illustrate and confirm what we saw in the previous slide.
And now they say some countries are that, Vanuatu won the most happiest country in the world in 2016 or something.
Most people's fun.
Well, vitamin D helps, doesn't it? Which comes from the sun. So lack of vitamin D causes depression.
They
So.
say that the tropical country people are more happy.
Yeah. So over to some self-support. This seems really obvious, but surprising how often this comes up. But just basic care of just eating enough and sleeping enough and being physically comfortable really impacts your capacity to be able to support yourself. And it seems obvious, but just looking at a few of these pieces, they are really important to and ways to support yourself. Mindfulness, which has become very trendy, and no doubt you all know about, really is just a way of engaging yourself in that in an objective way. So as I was mentioning before, switching off the critic, the judgment, the analysis, and just allowing your observations to see what's happening for you, so that you can have much more opportunity to be able to respond to yourself. Breathing is a fantastic way to give you information. So my breathing at the moment is a little bit shallow, and when I look at how I feel, it's not surprising for me, and I could most definitely slow down my breathing, which would probably make me more comfortable. But it gives you a lot of information, and you can really impact your anxiety levels and your sense of well-being just with your breathing. So breathing and checking in with yourself is such a good way to assess yourself by itself, and then you can use your breathing to travel through your body. And often I give people this exercise of just breathing through different parts of your body and just checking in to see how it's going. When you take your breath through, all the different parts of your body, you have a lot of information and a lot of engagement with what's happening.
Is it yoga grounding?
It's a yoga practice, pardon?
Is it different from grounding?
Breathing?
Yeah.
They're kind of hand in hand, aren't they? They're very good friends of each other, I think. To ground you, often engage your breathing, and I think when you're breathing, it certainly makes you much more grounded. So I think it's a really good point and a really good resource for you to use grounding as a way of hopping out of your mind where you can be very preoccupied and not engage with how you're going, and using the grounding or the breathing or the mindfulness to hop into your body so that you can see what's going on and pay attention to it, and then potentially do something about it. So with the balancing act, which we're constantly doing, and there's a lot of automatic processes that are going on in our body and our thoughts and our feelings where we're constantly in harmony, and in counselling we believe that we naturally move towards being in a sense of balance, in a sense of harmony with ourselves, and so that's where we're inclined to move as an organism. And so I think that it's a personal thing for you to find out for yourself what works for you, might not work for someone else, and to really make an effort to get to know yourself really well so that you're able to engage and take care of yourself. Because part of balance is that when you go out of really big balance, then to get back is such an effort. But if you can catch yourself and hear yourself just adjusting a little bit, and then you can just come back, then it's not such a big job and all-consuming, and something that has to, that you're having to be really consumed by to create that balance again. And so these are just two questions that I think are really good to continually ask yourself. What is it that you know that when you are in balance or moving towards balance, and what do you do when you're out of balance? So I was just giving you some examples of me and things that I recognise, and so it's just really simple and plain. And
I always sing when
Oh.
I'm sing.
Sing when you're out of balance or in balance?
No, when I'm in balance.
That's what I noticed too.
I keep very quiet when I'm out of balance.
So now you're not.
So you withdraw and...
Yes, just not talking.
And are you busy thinking?
Maybe because of that, when somebody is upsetting me or I'm upset or something, I'll just keep quiet. Wait,
I wish I could do that.
And as both Sargon and my examples show, that being out of balance and putting ourselves back into balance is just a normal part of life. It's just that you can be really out of balance and really potentially make yourself really sick and in a really difficult situation, or you can recognise and have really good rapport with yourself so that you just go out of a little bit of balance, and so you recognise what it is, and then you're able to readjust yourself and do what it is. And doing what it is can be the most simplest thing. It can just be going for a walk during your lunch break, or it could be sitting in the toilet and having, doing some breathing, or it can be just sitting outside in your car. I often sit in my car and just have some downtime and just a breather. So it can be really simple things that can make all the difference. What have I said here? Really continuation of the conversation I'm having. Sometimes you might need to do things that are really extreme to help you to get back into balance.
Like shouting?
Yeah, like shouting, that's what I was thinking too. Shouting. Someone told me the other day that they were so angry that they went into their bedroom and just smashed the pillows for half an hour. That's what it took for her to resume her balance.
Or if you have one of the boxing.
I'm worried about you. I'm worried about you.
Exercise is a good way of
fantastic leveler, isn't it? Exercise.
Because I find when I go for a swim, it's like I enter one way and I exit. Like I am a totally renewed person.
Where is my exercise? I do have an exercise slide, so we'll talk about that. Self-talk is so important. Being a counsellor and hearing what it is that people say to themselves and how little support they give and love and care and kindness. It's so important, and how insidious and how silent it can be that we're not aware of what it is that we're saying to ourselves. And it sounds so simple, but it really seriously impacts our health, the way that we talk to ourselves and the relationship we have. And it's most definitely something that we can develop and change. And it's one of those happiness factors that can make all the difference to that stress point. These are the things which positive self-talk has been identified by research to make a difference to. And this piece I think is really important to know your disposition, is that when I'm out of balance, I tend to talk faster. And so to start recognising that my disposition is different than yours and isn't necessarily the obvious way, but that you know what it is that is for you and how it is for you, so that you're able to acknowledge it and to address it. Exercise, like you were saying, you know, there's lots of studies done on this, of how much it immediately just releases the endorphins. I mean, that's a pretty big plus, but how much it releases stress and gives us energy, and that it's so important that we need to find ways that we can exercise, and anything goes. You know, as long as you're not hurting yourself or anyone else, that really encouraged to do as much moving as you possibly can.
Does eating count as exercise?
Yes, definitely.
If you do it fast.
Exercising your mouth.
When I got stressed, I tend to open biscuits. Nowadays, when I'm stressed, I will go to the pantry. My son will say, "Are you stressed? Let's open a pack of biscuits."
Well, there you go. That's your disposition. So you know your disposition, and so you can make different choices. You can decide on other options, or give yourself a whole different variation. So that's one option, and then you can maybe going for a walk is another option, or having a conversation with someone, or going out and visiting someone, or there's many different options that we all know that eating a packet of biscuits isn't going to be useful for us in the long run. It just makes us feel better temporarily with the sugar and the taste, but it's very limited, isn't it? Sleep is a really common symptom that you'll present with if you're stressed or anxious or out of balance. That's a really good indicator as well. And there's lots of things you can do to improve your sleep or to aid good sleeping. No doubt you know lots of these things, but sometimes it might be just a good little pointer.
The fourth one is really hard. don't eat 3 hours before you go to bed.
And this one about habit is really the same with eating and exercising as well, that if we get in the habit of exercising every day, then our body kind of wants it and we feel agitated if we don't do it. And same with our eating patterns and sleeping, that when what time you go to bed at night, then you feel tired at that time of night, that you tend to. So we are, physiologically, we're very habitual, and our body really likes rhythm and predictability.
Don't eat 3 hours before bed. What if the person is hungry? Because I'm really able to sleep while I'm hungry.
But so that's the thing, isn't it? Is it your disposition? But ideally, and if you don't have any problems with sleeping, then it's not going to be a concern for you. But they're tips for improving sleep if you find it difficult.
So is that because the stomach will be like?
Because your body's digesting all the food,
yeah.
And so it's not kind of shutting down and going into sleep hormones. And these are some of the things that the good night's sleep improves. Sleeping is so important to your well-being. And good old food. So I think we all know about these kind of things, but these are just really, like I was saying before, the body's very regular and really likes regular eating, and it really keeps your energy in good stability when you're doing that. And things like eating biscuits and refined and processed and fatty foods really deplete our energy, even though we might feel like when we initially eat it that it feels good or we enjoy having a cup of coffee, how it can really deplete your energy long term. So you just need to gauge and take care of yourself as you go along. Sometimes it doesn't matter. I had the flu a month ago. I wouldn't eat any sugar when I had the flu because I felt so lousy that I really wouldn't want to impact and have that burden my body. But if I'm having fun and we're having a work morning tea, then I'll have some cake just for the fun of it. But the rule is just for maximum energy, to have high nutrients and ongoingly, and then 5% of the time just have some fun food for the sake of it. And so, last slide. I'm just having a look back at your circles, to find balance. That really, hopefully, is a good gauge for you to find areas that are like that for you, and to be compassionate and have a look at what's depleting you and potentially addressing that. And tools are easy for me to talk about, but for you to create habits and remembering is really difficult. And so I find that that's really the area that you need to work on. And I work with people in counselling is creating something that then over time then becomes a habit, because I've done it so many times before. So the way that you speak to yourself, exercising, health, sleeping well. So that's my little talk on balance.
Thank you very much. Do you have questions?
Oh yes, any questions?
May I just ask you, you hate me for this because we hadn't prepared this. There was a term which we used during session 1, and I believe there was some misunderstanding, or perhaps you didn't know the term. So it's about being desensitized. Mm-hmm. And so when I use this term, it's in no way negative or derogatory term, no. But effectively it means, and correct me if I'm wrong, that someone is less likely to experience shock or distress when one is overexposed to negative content. Mm-hmm. And so quite often the example I used at the end was that sometimes mental health workers appear kind of, not lacking empathy, but kind of that this is just the job they're doing. Mm-hmm. And so for us it is new, and we are more likely to feel empathy and be shocked and upset, when we are part of a distressing assignment. So do practitioners get,
desensitized?
Yes. Mm. And what does it involve?
The first thing that I think of being desensitized is someone who's had a lot of experience doing the same thing over and over again. and that you're probably very sensitive when you're doing something for the first time, because you're having to deal with it, experience something new, it's challenging, you're thinking about it, you're having to do it, participate in doing it. Whereas if you've done something over and over again, then it can appear like you're desensitised, but it's just that you're so comfortable and adjusted to doing it, like driving a car, that you become automatic or desensitised to the experience.
So that's not lack of empathy actually. What I experienced, like lack of empathy is not.
No,
actually.
it's not lack of empathy. It's like.
I think simple example would be new medical students going to theatre and seeing a lot of blood, and half of them could plane. But a year later, they're all fine, you know. And being through that so many times, does that shock is not anymore, or they're used to it. So.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions about finding your balance? Now that we're all balanced, thank you so very much. It was wonderful. Thank you. Right. Okay, thank you very much. And, because you don't eat sweet stuff, I'm no longer sure if it's appropriate, but you can give it back.
I can give it to my husband.
You can share it in the office.
Okay, and before we switch off, I would like to use this opportunity to say my heartfelt thank you to Leo for managing my mayhem. And yes, if you don't want it either. Thank you, Leo. Yes, okay, you've been wonderful. Okay, and that concludes our mini-series. And if you have any questions, please send them to me and I will pass them to our speakers. If you are lacking any handouts, again, let us know. We can scan and send them to you electronically. Okay, and for people watching online, you only redeem your professional development points if you fill in the survey, online survey, so please do that as well. Okay, so that's all from us. Thank you so much. Be good to yourselves. And yes, look after yourselves. Thank you. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Yes, oh yeah.